fiction writer. I've never written fiction. So obviously the first, the first inclination was to write it as a non-fiction book. But I very quickly realized that, Sufism is something which is so multi-layered and so complex that I wouldn't be able to do justice to the Sufi mind if I went for the non-fiction route. The reason being that the angle that I wanted to take was about understanding the Sufi mind. It's a very complex mind. It's a mind that forays into science and mathematics. At the same time, it's a mind that writes exquisite, beautiful poetry dedicated to the divine. When you have that kind of a mix, the crux of which is a word which I'm sure you've all heard, ishq, it becomes very difficult to write about ishq academically. And so that was the primary reason why I decided to go the novel way. And also because I thought this book should reach out to as many people as possible. And if you confine a philosophy like Sufism only to an academic volume, it would probably languish on the shelves of the archives or of a library. But if I were to be successful in developing a more relatable character and telling a human story imbued with the philosophies of Sufism, I thought I would reach a vast, a wider audience. And that all came about after innumerable discussions with my agent and then also with the publisher, and we finally found a way that we could meet somewhere in between, where it definitely is a novel, but it does not digress from the core philosophies of Sufism.
I'm sure now that it's over, you can feel a sense of mission accomplished, because your whole purpose to bring the magnificence of the Sufi world to the ordinary reader, the reader of fiction, and the oneness, the kindness, the compassion, reaching a state where the created and the creator almost become one. So I'm sure there's a sense of satisfaction at the end. What was...
Yes, a sense of satisfaction for sure, but also, I have to admit, a great sense of relief to get it out of the way. I don't want to sound, I don't want to sound in any way that I'm indicating that it was laborious. It was not laborious at all. It was a great joy, because I traveled extensively for the book. I traveled all the way from Delhi to Samarkand. From Samarkand, I wanted to go to Afghanistan and Iran, but I couldn't because of the political crisis there. And then I went into Anatolia, which is the larger landmass of Turkey, into Istanbul, and then finally into Andalusia, which is southern Spain. Once it was done, yes, it did feel, mission accomplished, but also a sense of relief.
And one of your characters, Haridas, the protagonist's best friend, he talks about the creative process being slow. And he says for a creative person, they have to first feel it in their heart, see it in their eyes, and then it manifests into plans in their head. Did you experience a similar process when you were writing the book?
Yes, because, as I mentioned, I've never written a novel before. And once we had decided that this is going to be a novel, my agent and my publishers, then came the real task of, understanding Sufi poetry, feeling it in the heart, and then, looking for metaphors, particularly in the arts and the crafts, through which I could build a character. And that had to be felt, that had to be seen. And only once you had seen it and felt it, could I actually, put pen to paper.
And I think it was a masterstroke to use Karar Ali as your protagonist, a craftsman, a tile maker, and through his journeys from Delhi to Central Asia, across Iran to Europe, he's restoring tiles in historic buildings and mosques. And at the same time, it's like a metaphor for his inner journey and the restoration of his own wounded soul and the bruises on his soul. Could you elaborate a bit about Karar Ali and why you chose your protagonist in this way?
The protagonist had to be someone who was young, so that I could tap into the younger audience, but someone who was inclined to the arts and someone who was inclined to more philosophical thought. The reason why I created this character and based him in Delhi is because that could give me the freedom to then take this so-called tile trail, which I spoke about. If you see the geometric tile work in Delhi, particularly in a monument called Dilkusha, which Willie Dalrymple has very brilliantly brought to life in The Last Mughal, you will see the same kind of tile work in Samarkand. You will see it in Iran. You will see it in Turkey, and you will see it in Spain. So that ribbon, if you wish, was something that I found. And the character of Karar Ali was then dropped into that space where art and mathematics merge, which basically is the Sufi mind, where rational thought, which is mathematics, and a creative, curious flight of the mind take place quite seamlessly. It's a complex state of mind, but Karar Ali is able to inhabit that space, and that character, gets molded through his journey, that takes him from Delhi to Spain after he's witnessed a catastrophical destruction, if you wish, of life as he's known it.
I think after reading the book, it'll be very difficult to see tile work in the way one saw it earlier. The poetry, the geometry, the shapes, and all of them interlocking together, the Star of Enlightenment. That was very, very beautifully done.
The tiles actually are, if some of you are interested in art, and particularly Sufi art, I'm not an art historian by any chance. Neither am I, an academic. I studied writing and I studied communication. So my approach to the book is purely from a standpoint of a creative writer. And what made me really fall in love with these tiles is when I landed up in this small little town called Bursa in Anatolia. Mm. And Bursa is a town that gets ignored by everyone who visits Turkey, because Istanbul looms large over Bursa, and poor little Bursa is forgotten. But if you were to go to Bursa and Konya is where arguably the greatest Sufi poet Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi is buried, you will see these tiles. When I was in Bursa, I went to this mosque called Yesel Kami Mosque, which is a small little mosque, but the tile work in that mosque, in my opinion, is the best tile work you would see anywhere. The geometric precision is so incredible that I was just awestruck. There was this fantastic old man. It was, I think, at about 7 in the morning when I had gone to Bursa, because my wife refused to travel with me from Istanbul. She was too much in love with Istanbul. Anyways, I entered this mosque, and this old Sufi was just sitting there, and he had a workshop of these tiles. And he didn't speak English, but in the silence of this mosque, he had an assistant who spoke English, and I spoke to him, and I said, what are these? And he said, well, look at these tiles, what do you see? And I said, well, I don't know. I see a square, I see pentagon, hexagon, these different shapes. And he said, no, every shape is a different race, a different religion, a different language, and they all interlock together in beauty. And right bang in the middle is the Star of Enlightenment. So this is a message for mankind, that if you unite and if you come together as one, you will reach enlightenment, regardless of your differences. And then that tile work really takes off all across the mosque. And it's breathtakingly beautiful. And at that point, I knew that I had my character who would be the tile maker.
And different faiths interlock beautifully within a true Sufi. And the Sufi way is the heartbeat of Islam, but today Islam is interpreted in a usually different way. What do you feel about the fact that today nothing is more lethal than power and dogmatic religion?
Yes, that's true. The Sufis, in many ways, particularly the Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi order and the Chishtis, it must be understood here that the Sufis were not divorced from faith. They were men of deep faith. Rumi's actual title is Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. He was a Maulana. He was a teacher. The problem was that the difference between Rumi and the average cleric, who is just one-dimensional and doesn't have anything better to do but just examine scriptures and lose himself in technicalities. The difference between Rumi and the average cleric was that Rumi had imagination. He had curiosity. He wanted to learn about the world. He wanted to know about different things. The same for Hafiz, the same for Muinuddin Chishti, who's buried in Ajmer. These were men of great curiosity, and that brought in innovation of thought. And they were men of faith. And so, this became the way forward for them. They, in many ways, became, I don't want to even use the word liberal because liberal is again such a loosely used word, but they became the champions, if you wish, of a more intellectual version of Islam, a more accepting, a more understanding way of Islam. And, they divorced themselves from power. Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi and the Chishti order used to keep their distance from kings. There's an old saying that when the Badshah used to enter from one door, Nizamuddin Aulia used to leave from the other door. So, that's how they stayed away from power.
It's often believed that the first work of fiction always has some autobiographical elements. Do you see glimpses of yourself in Karar Ali, your protagonist?
I think writers who usually say that, they never let any aspect of themselves into their characters, with all due respect, they lie. Because inevitably it happens, it just happens. Particularly with Karar Ali, not necessarily completely, but yes, there are elements of what he might say that find way through my words. Yeah.
And more than ever before, there is a crying need for Sufi wisdom today. And I'll quote you in one of your interviews. You said, "It's tragic what's happening in our world. It drives me to despair." How do you deal with this?
I think that was, I said that at one of the interviews in France, if I'm not mistaken. But I think the context was, everything that one encounters today, even in terms of climate change, even in terms of, the way we've looked at the world, and the earth that we leave behind for our children. If you really read some of the Sufi poetry, let's just concentrate on climate change, for example. They were deeply driven by understanding nature. I begin my book with a poem by a lesser-known Sufi called Seh Badruddin, who lived in the 16th century in Turkey. And he writes about how he feels. In Islam, there is a concept called Tawheed, which means one. One God, one mankind, and everything is one. So he writes saying that I feel one with the stream that flows next to my house. I feel one with the chirping of the birds. I feel one with trees. I feel one with the grass under my feet. And I am them and they are me and we are one. And so, you know, that kind of understanding of protecting nature, understanding the boundlessness of this earth and how it should be treasured, you know, these are lessons that we can all learn even from their, you know, their poetry, their writings, of how to look after this planet.
And you're a descendant of the founder of the Chishti Sufi order, and your grandfather was a Sufi scholar. Do you have any childhood recollections, any impact that it had in your early years to Sufi philosophy?
I'm descended from Hazrat Maudud Chishti, who was one of the founders, not the founder, one of the founders. And my grandfather was a practicing Sufi. I'm not a practicing Sufi. A practicing Sufi is one who's given to the love of God, which basically means an extraordinary amount of meditation, an extraordinary amount of seclusion, a way of you know, completely immersing yourself in the concept of tasawwuf and tawheed and takhliq ba ishq, which is creation through love, etc. So I remember, you know, quite vividly his presence in my life as a young boy. I also remember as a young boy wondering if, you know, if I would ever really understand him, because at the age of 5, he was also a great tennis enthusiast, and he used to take me to tennis matches. And then after that, he would go and give a lecture on Aristotle and Ibn Sina in Colaba. And I couldn't understand, you know, where he was coming from, because he could straddle both these worlds quite beautifully. So my memories of him are also of a man who took the Chishti order very seriously, and he retreated not by going and building a little hut on a mountain, but he retreated from materialism in many ways. But with that came the flourishing of intellectual thought. And so, you know, I remember those moments.
And the core of Sufism is love. Karar tells his lady love Abira, you have been merciful to me by loving me. So by loving his attribute of mercy that manifests in you, I am loving him. Could you just elaborate on this concept of ishq and ibadat?
Yes, that's actually from the works of incontestably the greatest Sufi that walked this earth. His name was Ibn al-Arabi, and he was born in southern Spain, and he lies buried in Damascus. Ibn al-Arabi came up with this concept called unity of being, wahadatul wajud, which basically means the origin of creation is oneness, unity. It is one, and from there are attributes of that unity of being, whether you want to call it Allah or God or whatever. Those attributes find their way into various different parts of the world, which he also calls tajalli, or manifestation. Now, to understand Ibn al-Arabi is very, very complex. I can't even, you know, I read him once, and it's just too difficult to understand him. In fact, one scholar once said, you know, if someone comes and tells you he's understood Ibn al-Arabi, either he's a liar or he's got it completely wrong. So anyway, so that's the kind of mind Ibn al-Arabi had. And so the unity of being comes with attributes. Those attributes then become what are, I think some of you must have heard of the 99 names of Allah. So, you know, Rahm, which means mercy, or Ghaffar, which means someone who's the protector, etc., etc. So at this point in time in the book, I found it quite interesting because Ibn al-Arabi also fell in love with a woman called Nizam. What is very important to understand is that these Sufis were men. And 3 of them definitely found love in human beings. For example, Ibn al-Arabi fell in love with a woman called Nizam. Hafiz fell in love with a woman called Shakh-e-Nabat. And imagine a woman with a name called Shakh-e-Nabat. Shakh-e-Nabat means a branch of sugarcane. And then, of course, we all know about the intimate relationship between Rumi and Tabriz. So it is through that love, which is called ishq-e-majazi, that the protagonist, Karar Ali, discovers ishq-e-hakiki, which is the love of divine. Because of the beauty of the created, he falls helplessly in love with the originator. And I think that's very important to understand, that it's not, the poem is not for her. The poem is written using her as a metaphor, but he's falling in love with the originator. That is God.
The creator.
Yeah, the creator.
And during one of your protagonist's introspections, Karar Ali grapples with logic and rationale versus faith and intuition. And then he realizes that each of these are vital to make us complete. But this is quite challenging, trying to combine logic, rationale, faith, and intuition.
Yeah, and even amongst the Sufis, they had huge debates between rational thought and inspired intuition. So, Ibn Sina, for example, champions rational thought. And Ghazali, who's another great intellectual giant, champions inspired intuition. And he gives the example of love. Love cannot necessarily be rational, and love leads to creation. So, you have this debate, this fierce debate happening between the Sufis about which is more important. But that once again leads to flourishing intellect, where a cross-pollinated mind leads to a more enriched soul.
And according to Sufi philosophy, life is all about balance, like the dance of the dervishes. While they whirl in their loose white robes, one palm faces skywards, the other downwards. So that's symbolic of receiving and giving.
Yeah.
How much of this Sufi wisdom has impacted your own personal life?
Yeah. From childhood, watching my grandfather's interpretations, an immense amount. But as I keep reiterating that I'm not a practicing Sufi, but watching them, and I spent a lot of time in Turkey, and I still do. I'm there. There was a time when I was in Turkey almost every month on a cheap Ryanair flight from London, which costs nothing, and you land up staying in a not so posh place like a tekke or a lodge. But that's where you really have these moments of wonderful engagement. But to answer your question specifically, the whirling of the dervish, once again, is a complete surrender, if you wish. It's the surrender of intellect. It's the surrender of any kind of activation of thought to the one. And that's how they whirl. It's not a whirling where you would, after the whirl, go to the dervish and say, "Oh, I have a mannat, can this come true?" Do you know what I mean? It's a transcendence that they've accomplished in a kind of merging with the divine, or the quest to merge with the divine. And the caps that they wear, the long, tall caps made of fur, are a metaphor for the tombstone of their ego, which basically means that they have crushed their ego. Their ego now lies in a tomb, and they have no more ego left. So they are now, completely in a state of fana, and then into a state of baqa. So, yeah.
I'm deliberately avoiding getting into the plot because you don't want there to be spoilers. It's an enchanting, magical tale. And
yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, all of this, we're just talking about the philosophical aspects, but it is a novel.
Could you share highlights of the plot without the spoilers?
Well, it's a story of a young man who lives in Delhi in 1739. And oddly enough, Delhi at that time is seeing a renaissance of sorts, where you have the great poets like Mir Taqi Mir and Dard and Soda, all coming to life basically against the backdrop of a fading Mughal empire. And this young man, has found his link to the divine through a woman that he loves, and in a heartbeat he loses it all. His journey becomes a metaphor for rebuilding his life through Sufi philosophy, and the journey that he undertakes is all the way from Delhi and into southern Spain. And it's in southern Spain that he starts restoring these wonderful tile works on the Alhambra and in Granada and in Cordoba, because he has the skill to restore these geometric tiles that he had acquired in Delhi. And that link is then also linked up in Andalusia, Spain, where he finally finds a new life.
And his journey is embellished with pearls of Sufi wisdom. I'll just share two of my favorites. Oh brother, you are nothing but your thoughts. The rest of you is merely skin and bones. If your thought is a rose, you are a rose garden. If your thought is a thorn, you're fuel for the fire. And there's another one. If you want the joy of heart, contentment acquire, never can the man of greed fulfill his desire. God created man to further kind compassion. There was no dearth of angels to offer adoration. And now we'll request the author to read his favorite passage from the book.
Thank you. Sorry, just bear with me a second, please. No, I can't find the one that I'm... Was that your husband?
Who else?
Gosh, I didn't mark it. But, gosh, I'm so sorry.
No, don't worry. I wish I had the page number.
I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to... Here it is. Okay. So this is a passage where Qarar Ali has landed up in Spain, and he, in Delhi, when he was living in Delhi, he was the chosen hand of the emperor, the most renowned craftsman of Delhi. And obviously with that came ego, and with that came a sense of, a sense that I'm the best, if you wish. But suddenly fate has something else in store for him. He goes through a completely life-changing experience, and he lands up in Spain. And this is a bit about his life in Spain and how he realizes that he's got to, let go of ego. Every morning, Qarar woke up and went to the escuela, or school. Among inquisitive Spanish children who had never seen a Hindustani before, he taught geometry. From the school, he could see Catalina's olive groves and sunflower fields. But he didn't see her most weeks. Some days, he would be lucky to see her under the olive trees. Seeing him distracted by the Spanish beauty and his campus faltering, his students would break into unabashed laughter. On many an occasion after giving lessons, Qarar would not go back to the barn, but instead he would wander away for long walks on his own. He was aware he was getting esoteric in nature. His inward journey had begun. It gave him peace. There were moments when his ego had been awakened. In those moments, he was Qarar Ali, the renowned craftsman who had been the chosen hand of emperors, khans, and sultans. His hand had brought life back to the majestic buildings from Hindustan to Spain. That voice told him he was the greatest of restorers. He was the one to which every brick and tile should bow. That voice mocked at his current status as a mere geometry teacher to fledgling minds in a remote village. Where once he had been paid in sacks of glittering gold, now he only got the smiles of children. There had been a time when he had been the love of a woman who had shimmered in diamonds, sapphire, and emeralds. Now he was the love of a peasant's daughter who appeared in simple stitches. How he had fallen, said that voice arrogantly within him. But then, as that voice rose menacingly, another voice within overtook it and subdued it forever, the voice of the Sufi. During his walks in the wilderness, climbing mountains and shrubbery ridges, which took on the look of pink velvet in the Spanish sunset, the verses of Rumi left his lips, drowning his ego completely. See how in pride they go, with lifted head, till fate, with a sudden blow, smitteth them dead. Flowers every night blossom in the sky, peace in the infinite, at peace am I. What makes the Sufi? Purity of heart, not the patched mantle and the lust perverse of the vile earth-bound men who steal his name. He in all dregs discerns the essence pure, in hardship ease, in tribulation joy. Then his own words reached deep within him. A true Sufi gives all he has. These are your greatest moments, when a child's sterile mind stirs with a thirst for knowledge because you have planted a seed there. You shall find yourself standing right there with a water canter. This is your contribution to mankind, your khidmat-e-khalq. Nurture these saplings.
Beautifully, very, very profound. And now we can take some questions from the audience. Now you're getting a mic.
That was fascinating. But you know, one fundamental question, and this is fuel to fire, as Payal put it.
Louder.
Can you hear me?
Louder.
Okay. Can you hear me?
No, it's very
sorry.
soft.
So this is fuel to fire, as Payal put it.
No,
You know, Maziv, still
Mic
not
is
audible?
not working.
So Mazib is haram in Islam. Mazib, you know, music, singing, you know, all these are haram, ostensibly haram in Islam. And this is recorded in various hadiths and even attributed in parts of the Quran. There are specific quotes, including from you know, Fateh in 1055, where he quotes saying that music, singing, musical instruments, all these are haram or banned. And now increasingly, the Sufi aspect of Islam is under attack, both in Shia Iran, where I have been thrice, and in Sunni Pakistan, where any number of Sufi mosques have been attacked and people killed. How do you see the Sufi movement, which is one of inclusive growth for people with ishq at the base, as Rumi, legendary Rumi put it in so many of his shairis or kalams? How do you see that surviving going forward in this rigid environment that we now are in?
I think it's a challenge, you know, and that challenge has been there since the last, I think, 300 years. But I'm quite hopeful because, you know, every time I actually just came from Ajmer, and you know, it's still vibrant. It's still, you know, you see humanity interlocking in beauty, all kinds of people there, all different faiths. So I think, you know, it's surviving, no doubt. But I think you're also quite right when you say that, you know, it's under not necessarily attack, but I know what you mean. It's being seen as something a bit too liberal, if you know what I mean. And how do I see it in the future? I think it will survive and flourish and thrive, because you can't really keep something as beautiful as Sufism down for too long. Yes, it's been confined only to a visit to a dargah, only to, you know, tying a thread and hoping that you get a wish fulfilled. Nothing wrong with that. I still do it. You know, I do it all the time. But the depth of Sufism, which is the philosophy, as you said, you know, the concept of ishq, ishq-e-ilahi, takhliq by ishq, etc., has lost its voice. It is the lost voice of compassion. And I have faith that it will find greater resonance in time, you know. Even if you go to Konya, for example, if you go to Jalaluddin Rumi's mausoleum in Anatolia, it's not the easiest to get to. You know, it's not near Istanbul, or it's not. But when you go there, you see a lineup of people. So there is hope.
And it's beautiful the way this book transports us into another era. It's truly beautiful. Any more questions?
Thank you so much. That sounds like a fascinating book, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
My question is that there's so much about southern Spain and Andalusia in your book, and you've done a lot of traveling there. And of course, it was the flowering of the Umayyads after, you know, they were overthrown in the Middle East. Is there any, did you find any Sufi societies there, or any, because, you know, the Catholic, the counter-Catholic what's the movement was so strong that and I know that all these wonderful, the Alhambra, they've all been turned into monuments. But did you find any signs of any Sufi, well, I would call it societies, because I suppose it's not really a dargah anymore.
Thank you for that question. Not a single sign, not even one. I didn't find a single, you know, Sufi center or a Sufi kind of point of reference in southern Spain. But just across the tip is the southernmost part of Spain, which is called, which is a city called Tarifa. And a 45-minute boat ride from there, you land up in Morocco. You know, so you are at the confluence of two continents and two vast water bodies, the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. And when you land up in Tangiers in Morocco, oh, it's an abode of the Sufis. So if you take a little 45-minute boat ride from Tarifa to Tangiers, you'll find them there, but not in Spain, I'm afraid.
Any more questions?
I wanted to visit Shiraz, where Hafiz lies buried. I wanted to visit Jami's place. I wanted to see Jami's works. Jami wrote, of course, the most incredible, beautiful book called Haft Aurang, which is the Seven Thrones, where he talks about the divine love of Yusuf and Zulekha. So I definitely wanted to visit these places.
Yeah, the lady at the back. Mike.
Hi, I'm really looking forward to reading your book. I just wanted to ask, how can one dip their feet into Persian and Sufi poetry? Where do we start? And also, which translation for Rumi would you really recommend? Because I know the one we are used to right now is not as accurate as it was told to be. So.
That's a lovely question. Thank you for asking that. You know, there's an old saying that there's always a little, not too big, there's always a little traitor in a translator. So it's difficult to really, you know, say that this is the best translation. But I would urge you to learn Farsi. I think if you learn Farsi, you will really understand it. There are some wonderful Farsi teachers in India and in all parts of the world. The one that I would recommend, if you want to read it in English, as far as Rumi is concerned, his Mathnavi has been translated by Nicholson. And Nicholson is supposed to be, one of the finest. As far as Hafiz is concerned, I would recommend Abri. Abri is by and large considered the best translator for Hafiz. So those are the two translators that I would recommend. I think there's a lady there in the black.
Yes. You have a question?
I do. So, Sufism is basically not a religion. One would say it's a way of life, way of thinking. And in India, one can say that Sikhism is a derivative of the Sufi faith. And it's become a religion on its own and become very big. So anywhere else in the world has Sufi lent its ideals to the local religions to become so big on its own? Because that's the easiest way of kind of, spreading the message by incorporating yourself into the local religion, because people may not be so happy about, going over to the other side.
I see, well, to the gentleman's question here, Iran is deeply Shia, Muslim, but Shia. But still, the Iran was the heartbeat of Sufism for a very long time. Hafiz, for example, in Shiraz, Jami, Sanai, Sadi. I mean, Sadi wrote a poem which is supposed to be, which people thought was blasphemous. At least the clerics thought it was blasphemous. He said, God created creation because he wanted to be loved. So, that's how far the Sufis went. But how did they influence? I think the country where you see that deep influence is in Iran, and I've not been there. But the Iranis that live in London, for example, one engages with them, and although they're deeply, devoutly Shia, they're also very, very immersed in Sufi thought. So yeah.
Integrate into another religion, like Sikhism is very obviously, like Sufism into the Hindu tenets, so to speak. So, to become that region's own, which is not non-Islamic.
I don't know, to be fair. I wouldn't be able to point that out. I wouldn't know.
I think that's what she's alluding to in terms of it having its influence across religious thought. I think that's what she's driving at, the tasawwuf element in Sufi thought.
Tasawwuf is very simple, and it's also very complicated. Tasawwuf is basically a retreat from materialism, and tasawwuf is when you actually let go of yourself, particularly your ego, through an enormous amount of meditation. One of the elements is something which I would think you must have heard of, called zikr, where one of the 99 names of God is repeated time and time again, and apparently the effect of that is a complete polishing of your soul and a sense of an inward journey that begins. But that is tasawwuf, and how does it influence other religions? I don't know, but I do know that a lot of a lot of the Sufis were influenced, for example, by yogis, and a lot of their way of, for example, chanting. You could find the origins in how the chantings happened in other faiths. So those are the possible similarities that one could look at.
That is the question there.
Yeah, sir, you spoke about Sufi love and Ishq. Can you repeat this once again so that we understand it more clearly?
Well, Ishq, in Sufism, Ishq has close to 300 layered meanings. So it's very difficult to actually, put it in one go. But to talk about it from a standpoint of Sadi's poem, where he says that God created creation because he wanted to be loved, basically means that even God needs to be loved. Now, and creation is created through love. The other pillar of Sufism, which actually starts emerging from that thought, is takhliq ba ishq, which is takhliq basically means creation, ba is with, and ishq is love. So everything that you create is through love. And it's very simple. You know, if you love something, you'll create it. If you love something, you'll excel in it. And that also starts leading to a burst of culture and a burst of arts in Sufi art forms. So qawwali. Then you have tile making. You have miniature paintings. One of the finest miniature painters was a person called Kamaluddin Behzad, who lived in the 16th century in Herat. And he painted the most beautiful miniatures of Fariduddin Attar's funeral, who was a Sufi who had been murdered. Then he painted the beautiful rendition of the love between Yusuf and Zulekha and how they merge into the divine. So from Ishq comes everything that is creativity, that is creatively led. And without Ishq, according to the Sufis, you cannot create.
And at one point in the book, there's this line that creation needs restoration, but restoration doesn't need creation. Just a line on that before we wrap up.
Well, that's actually something I wrote because the character finds himself in a situation where his father actually goes to his teacher and tells him, why are you getting my son to restore old buildings and old tile works and brick walls? You know, get him to create a monument where he can be paid in gold sacks and become a rich man. And that's when the Sufi tells him that creation is okay, but restoration is more important because creation will always need restoration. And restoration doesn't necessarily need creation.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure your grandfather, the Sufi scholar, will be a very, very proud man.
I hope
Thank
so.
you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. There's another gentleman.
Okay, we'll take one last question.
This is not exactly a question. It's an appreciation and heartfelt regards, as well as there's a request also. I admire your aesthetic points of view, but I request you to please consider the word mankind, which you have used repeatedly. I think nowadays the word is humankind, not mankind.
Sure.
If you please reconsider.
Sure. Thank you.